So we're talking about how we're going to get to some kind of budget solution. And Congresswoman Sinema, you're part of a so-called gang of 32.
These gangs keep getting bigger. Right? There's like a gang of 8 in the Senate, and in the House we like to be, bigger.
I'm imagining the scene from Warriors. Because they're saying, "Oh, gang of 32."
We all come charging down with spears, right?
No, but so I think to the extent that these bipartisan gangs exist, it's usually in the Senate, yes. which hasn't completely become totally and entirely polarized in quite the way the House has.
Well, because of the function of the Senate, you have to have 60 votes to get anything done. So you have to have some level of bipartisanship to get anything done. In the House, of course, it's majority rules. So the idea that we have this gang of 32, it's 32 freshmen, Democrats and Republicans together. We all started making friends back in December during our orientation and began, talking about the fact that frankly, Congress is totally dysfunctional. I mean, the 112th Congress got virtually nothing done. And so our conversation was not, I agree with this and I disagree with this. It was, we actually need to work together to solve our problems. The American public depend on us to do this, and they're demanding it. So
no, but
that's why
okay. But the 112th Congress, the Congress wasn't dysfunctional. The Republican Party that ran the Congress was dysfunctional. It just seems to me like and look, I understand. I'm not a complete crazy purist on this. Ted Kennedy is a perfect model of this, right? This is someone who, it's like sailing. Ted Kennedy would probably appreciate this analogy, right? It's like you've got the boat and you've got the wind and where you want to go, okay? And you got to negotiate between the two. You can't just go with the wind, and you can't just decide I'm going there if the wind isn't there. And Ted Kennedy was a model legislator, right? He knew where he wanted to go. He had the boat, and the winds blew in different ways, and he made different bipartisan deals in different moments to get where he wanted to go, right?
But very much to your point, they're just throwing anchor.
That's my point.
That they can stay there, and it worked.
It got harder in his last few years when people on the Republican side who had dealt with him, like McCain and Hatch, had eventually to apologize for having dealt with him because the Republican Party became more radically right-wing.
But that's exactly why.
They couldn't sustain it.
Right. So
that's exactly why we're doing the Gang of 32. Look, we know that the folks who are higher up in privilege and prestige at the Congress are not necessarily on the same page as us. But I'll tell you, you take a look at the name of the 32 people who are on here, very, very diverse ideological backgrounds. And all we've said in this statement is, you know what, we've got a few core principles that we can agree on. Let's find some solutions here. Let's work on them together. And hopefully, this new class of freshmen, which I would say across the board, Republican and Democrat, very interested in solving problems, very interested in practicality, not as ideologically rigid as former, classes. And what we're saying to the folks who are higher up than us is actually, you know what we heard from the American public is that they don't care about your ideological fights or who's at fault or who's put down the anchor. They just want solutions.
But I see, the problem is, we can even take this a step further. The problem is not Congress per se. The problem is the electorate that is sending them to Congress. And the reality is that the Republicans have been developing an electorate over an extended period of time that is extremely rigid. We can see the polling. We can see that their own electorate does not want them to compromise as a principle.
But I don't think that's true across the board.
Well, that may not be true across the board, but I'm talking in terms of a majority of the Republican caucus. Their constituent says very specific things. Do not compromise. Hold these principles that are based, frankly, on stuff that is out of the mainstream. The reason why we see more, to the extent that we see any more compromise in the Senate is not necessarily because of the 60 vote threshold. It's in spite of that.
Statewide.
It is because they're running statewide, and they do not have that deep red constituent.
And here's, I just want to put this on the table because I want to talk about, in this context, right? Okay, solving problems, because you hear this a lot. We're sent there to solve problems. American people want to solve problems, and that's true. Although it's sort of tautological, right? You can't poll people on, do you want Congress to make problems worse? Presumably they'd say no. So yeah, solve problems.
That's what Congress is really good at doing.
No, I know that, right? But the point is that solve problems. There's this idea in Washington that there's some kind of non-ideological, practical, technocratic way of solving problems, but all things that emerge out of politics are political,
or even an agreed solution.
Right. And I want to talk about the last time that we had everyone come together to solve problems was 1983, right? This was the big fixed Social Security bipartisan deal that got done, which is now hailed as a model. And I want to look at the distributional effects of that because it highlights precisely my fear for what might be on the table right now after this.